Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Heartfelt Homes Real Estate Show, episode 2, where we cover all things related to Greater Boston real estate investing. I'm really looking forward to today's guest. This conversation was really fun. I feel like I could talk to this guy for hours. He's taught me so much in the last couple of years around what it means to be a good investor, sound, data-driven, and what makes a successful project. He focuses primarily on buy and hold properties using the BRRRR method, which we'll talk a little bit about on the show. And it's become very popular over the last few years. So without further ado, Lesley Kuffour, local BRRRR investor. Let's get right into it. Welcome to the show, Lesley. It's good to have you on. Looking forward to the conversation, today's conversation. You are one of the first people that I talked to about BRRRR investing, which is the theme of today's show. You and I spent a lot of time last year and earlier this year talking about what BRRRR is. You were actually the one that kind of introduced me to the acronym. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation and spend a little time hearing about your background and what you have going on with real estate investing right now. So welcome.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate you having me here. It's an absolute honor to be able to have this conversation with you here. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for making the time on this sunny 60-degree day. I feel bad stealing a little time from you, but I appreciate it.
No worries. I can't go out anyway. We have to quarantine, right? So.
Yeah, that's true. So, yeah. All right, Lesley, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into real estate investing, what your focus areas are, and what you're kind of into right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, my name is Lesley, and I live in Boston. But I actually was born and raised in Ghana, and I moved into the States in 2012 for college. But at the time, I moved to Connecticut. That was my permanent resident. That became my permanent resident because my family lived there. So that's actually my primary market for investing, and we'll get into a little bit more about that. But what got me into real estate? So I can't really pick out one specific moment in my life where I would say, okay, that it was like a light bulb that went off, right? It was a series of events, that I could kind of, go back into my early teenage years, trying to that I can pinpoint, examples or, scenarios that happened in my life that kind of make me start thinking that direction. So the first thing was my grandma. So my grandma raised me, and she was a businesswoman. She had a lot of different businesses, a lot of different stores, wholesaling goods that she would import from overseas, China, and of sorts. And over the years, she was able to build herself, a nice, decent home, but it was pretty huge. And it was about 8 bedrooms and about 7 bathrooms. And I remember, it got to a point where things were a little bit tight. Money wasn't really coming in as much as it would normally come in. And so what she did was she kind of separated parts of the house, and, she rented out, a section of the house, right? And also too, in Ghana at the time, if you wanted a home, you really had to build it cash. So she really didn't have like a note on the property or anything. And so she had rents coming in from a tenant that she rented out the property to. And that would, float us for a very long period of time. And that was kind of like one of my early sort of introductions to having some kind of income from real estate without having to, actively work. And also too, secondly, I remember one thing that she did was she built our home pretty close to a main road. And I remember we were going through some very tough times, and she had an idea to develop some stores in front of our house. She had the lot, so she knocked down a wall, put up some stores, and leased it out. And that also became another form of income for her. And that supported the family for quite some time. And so those were kind of the things that, started putting a battery in my back. When I went to college, I remember I'll tell my roommate, which is funny because we're actually business partners now. I would always tell him that, as soon as I graduate from college, I'm going to try to make sure I set some money aside and start investing into real estate just to help create some passive income and just, attain, some financial goals that I had pretty quickly on. So I sort of generally, knew that I wanted to get into real estate. And so, one of my biggest goals after graduating college was to, get my first investment property. So I started reading a lot of books. One of my favorite books that I read that really, really kind of helped push me was William Nickerson, which is how to turn $1,000 into 5 million. And then, Rich Dad Poor Dad. And then I started, you know, I started getting access to BiggerPockets and also networking with some local investors in Connecticut and things of that nature. So fortunately for me, the first year that I graduated from college, I was able to get a job with Wayfair as an engineer. And, I saved up a lot of money, during my first year. I went through some extreme measures to be able to kind of save up some money to come up with my down payment for my first property. And then I bought my first multifamily in Connecticut, January 2017, and that's how I started. So,
dude, that's awesome. So it sounds like your family was almost like house hacking in Ghana, right?
Yes, absolutely. You can call it. So we actually, so that house we ended up renting it out. We actually still have tenants till this day, right? So like my grandmother passed, obviously, but the income from that property is still going to the family. So
wow,
certainly the first house hacking moment there.
Multi-generational house hacking, nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. So you live in Boston, and obviously that's where you and I know each other from. But you're investing, you said in primarily in Connecticut, so an hour and a half away from Boston. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. So I actually invest. I have a couple of multifamilies in about across 3 cities in Connecticut, Vernon, Manchester, and New Britain, which is about an hour and a half away from Boston.
Nice. That's awesome, man. And why why Connecticut and why that portion of Connecticut? What's so attractive about that area?
Yeah, so it's very simple. When I wanted to start with real estate investing, there are a lot of opportunities out there as far as different markets. Obviously, Boston has its own barriers to entry, right? It's a very high priced market. At the time when I was doing my research, all roads were leading towards the south, right? And it felt like that was more feasible because the price of entry was very low, right, compared to what we have to kind of deal with up here. But I ended up settling with Connecticut because I just wanted to, from a practicality standpoint, I just wanted to kind of get into the game with a market that I was familiar with, right? So I lived in Connecticut for 5 years, right, pretty much, and so. I have a lot of relationships in the local neighborhoods, right? A lot of friends that I made. I knew the market pretty well. I knew the neighborhoods. I knew where folks wanted to live. I knew where folks wouldn't want to live, right? I knew where, the amenities were. And so that was that was essentially what kind of made me get drawn into the Connecticut market. And as I started investing in the Connecticut market, I actually discovered a niche for me, which really ends up working pretty well for my business model. And so I stuck with it.
That's awesome. So you knew the area, and I think, the old saying of invest in what you know sounds like you took that to heart, right? So you knew the area and everything going on around there. So, and you mentioned your business model. So maybe we can start to talk a little bit around, so that's your geography, that's your market, that area works really well for you. You also mentioned kind of niche types of investing and what may not work in the Boston market. So what's your investment model and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So our bread and butter is long-term buy and hold investing, right? Actually, I can kind of take a step back and start with my first deal. So really how I approached my first deal wasn't certainly, how I approached my business now. Quite honestly, I actually didn't approach my first deal as a business, right? At that time, I was more thinking, I need to create passive income. I need to buy a couple apartments so, I can have a couple $100 in cash flow coming in every month. And so actually what I realized was, you know, there's nothing really passive about real estate, right? You can delegate a lot of the different sort of responsibilities to other teams, but there was nothing really passive about it. And so I had to be actively involved, and that meant that this was actually a business. And so after my first deal, I started looking at it more of from a business standpoint, right? Creating a business model around it, and how to achieve my goals with the business model. So my first deal was a turnkey investment property. It was actually a brand new construction, right? That's that if my deal, if anything about that deal was bad or anything went wrong, it would be that, right? Um, Buying a turnkey brand new construction, certainly, well, for me personally, I don't think it's the right way to go, right? But I bought a duplex. It was brand new construction. I was very happy. And then later on, a couple months into it, I just realized that I was really going through sort of the cons of having a new construction, right? So like the tight margins, the tight cash flow margins and whatnot. So I actually was like, you know what, I'm going to find a way to add some value into this and sort of help increase my revenue there. So what I did was, I had an empty and open basement, and I actually ended up furnishing that basement. And the basement was 1,000 square foot, right? So I actually split it into two, and turn it into sort of studio apartments, 500 square foot studio apartments. And I rented those out. And so that obviously added some value to the property. And I increased, my rent roll significantly there as well. And so that was kind of my first unofficial BRRRR process, right? And then, from there,
And Lesley, what's
yeah,
BRRRR? Just for folks that are listening
yeah.
who may have seen the acronym or heard BRRRR but don't know what it is, can you talk a little bit about what BRRRRing is?
Sure, sure. So BRRRR, the acronym really stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat, right? So it's a real estate investment process where you find properties that are in distress that that needs some kind of work, right? Some TLC. So you go in there, you update the property, you renovate it, and then after renovating it, you rent it out, and after renting it out, you refinance it with the motive of pulling out your initial capital investment out. And then once you have your initial capital investment out, you can use that to repeat that process again. So it's kind of like a loop, or recycling your money, right? And it's a very great strategy if you if you have aspirations to kind of scale a little bit more quicker than your traditional investment approach would allow you to.
Right, because I imagine if you're buying either turnkey, or if you're buying, if you're buying in cash, and not refinancing, you may do very well, but you're going to be scaling a lot more slowly than if you can recycle that capital over and over again.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Got it.
And the BRRRR strategy for the most part, existed, decades and decades, prior to it being actually coined, right? But I think the idea of it, or coining that term and actually theoretizing the whole thing, and compounding it, actually kind of ties it all together so people can kind of effectively execute it as a strategy in a whole. But I would always say, in my personal experience, right, the BRRRR strategy is great, and it's a very, very good strategy to use, right? But I think a lot of folks don't typically shine a light on how easy it is to fail at the BRRRR than it is to knock it out the park, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, in my personal experience, I think it's actually easier to fail at it than it is to be successful at it, right? Especially for a new investor, because there are so many different aspects of it that you really would have to, so like I've heard people say, if you can effectively do a BRRRR strategy, you've mastered essentially all aspects of real estate investing, right? And that in itself, should let sort of the level or the difficulty level that a BRRRR investment strategy could be. And we can take a step back and just start looking at the different components of a BRRRR, right? So
Well, maybe, I mean, you mentioned success and failure of a BRRRR, right? I'd like to
yeah.
talk a little bit around what you think makes a successful BRRRR or an unsuccessful BRRRR. I know you mentioned what it is, but what you see success and failure criteria. Let's talk a little bit about that, and then I think that'll
Yeah.
open a can of worms. So let's talk about
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. So for me or for our company, we really have sort of two metrics to define success for us when we look at the BRRRR picture, right? So if we can effectively recoup all of our initial capital investment back and not over leverage, right, then we are successful at it. And so when I say over leverage, right, so one thing about the BRRRR is, when you go through, rinsing your money and kind of snowballing the initial capital investment into a lot of deals, all you essentially doing is just using or leveraging other people's money to be able to acquire these properties, right? And so if you're not very careful, you're most likely going to get to a point where you're taking on more debt than you could possibly service. And even if you're doing, you're teetering around maybe like a safety mark, as soon as market tanks or as soon as there are any kind of tight, restrictions in the economy, then you start to really, really feel it, right? And so for us, we have developed a metric that kind of help us make sure that we're not, over leveraging, right? And so one of our, one of the things that we try to do is we try not to push our LTV beyond 60/40. If the deal is really good and the cash flows are, the other, sort of expense factors allows us to have a really, high cash flow number, then we might allow for, the loan to value to kind of push a little bit beyond that 60.
And so your goal is to leave 40% at a minimum, 40% equity in the property at that refinance phase. Is that right?
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah. So a lot of
Yeah.
people would think, 20 or 30% equity left would be successful. So that's really interesting to hear that you're definitely sounds like you're more on the aggressive side and favoring leaving a little bit more equity in the property, but still trying to capture that cash back so that you can move on to the next project, like you mentioned.
Absolutely. It definitely helps. It definitely helps to be more aggressive on that front, than not. I definitely believe in that.
Nice. That's awesome. And then so a little bit about, like, obviously you may have, or not obviously, but you may have run into some projects that, are you're not able to do that, and so would be unsuccessful. And so maybe talk a little bit around kind of an unsuccessful BRRRR, and how you kind of navigate that situation when you either need to take out, you can't reclaim the entire capital outlay that you put into the project, or if you pull too much money out, you may not cash flow the property. And so just talk a little bit about how you balance those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there could be, a bunch of different, issues that comes up at like different times, right? Obviously, you need to make sure, with the first thing that you're doing, which is the buy-in process, right? You need to make sure that you're buying really right? And so that kind of goes back to that even affects, the LTV rate that I'm talking about when you get to the refinancing point, right? And especially now in these market conditions, right? You want to be extremely picky. So you want to know exactly what you want so you can be picky and get to exactly what you want, right? And so, for example, we have a rule of thumb before a deal qualifies to be even like really analyzed, right? So if we're looking at, say, a multifamily, and a multifamily has an ARV of, if it has an ARV of $100,000, we don't want to be all in beyond 60,000, right? So like we want to be at 60% all in of the ARV. And we figure that, okay, if we can find, and one good thing too about, finding that ARV to help make sure that, you kind of hit those percentage marks too, is actually, paying an appraiser ahead of time to get the ARV, get the current value of the property and what, it'll be worth after you repair it. And so that helps us certainly, and our lender that we use also requires it as well. So, that helps us figure out, okay, this is the deal that we're going into. It looks like this deal, once we're all in, once we're done, it's going to be around $100,000 worth. We are going to try to not spend beyond 60K, right? And so how that really helps us is, and we've actually, ran into a situation where when we initially bought the property, the ARV was around 260, right? But then when we were actually done renovating, it was a huge rehab, and it took about 4 months. And when we were done renovating in just that quick amount of time, the appraisal on the property value came down to like 220 or something like that, right? It was really, really low. But one thing that really helped us was because we made sure that we stuck to that 60% margin. Refinancing it at 70-30, we were still able to kind of meet our initial capital investment, right? And I don't think we were able to take anything out, but we were still able to, as profit, right? But we were still able to take our capital or our
Sure.
initial investment back, so we didn't lose anything as far as that deal goes, right? And so,
And
yeah.
I was just going to say, and I think that's that's what that ultra conservative approach gets you, is that if and this might be a good segue into the next topics around kind of coronavirus and how it's impacting your business, but having that kind of ultra conservative stance of wanting to leave 40% equity if things do go south, if an appraisal comes in low, if the market gets hit and prices drop 5 to 10%, you have built-in protection right there on the refinance side, so that even if you only pull out your cash and no profit per se, you still have access to that cash to pay off your bridge loans and to move on to the next project, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, on the buying side, it's good to start protecting yourself, right? Obviously, you know what your exit strategy is, and so it's good to start, protecting yourself as early as the buying process. And so for us, that's one of the ways in which we kind of, make sure that we have some sort of safety net to catch us if things go sour a little bit.
Awesome.
Yeah. And when it comes to the rehab part, that was quite honestly one of our biggest pain points starting on, because we went through a slew of contractors, right? And thankfully we were able to land a very good contractor, which we've developed a relationship with since last year. And he's been very, very good for us. I mean, literally he having a good contractor has been sort of really, it's like the main rock star piece that makes sure everything flows and works together for us, because we can really control our costs a whole lot better. And time, we can really follow through with our timelines now. And even with this contractor, we had some issues with him in the early beginning stages, but we were able to kind of talk and iron things out and get on the same page a little bit better. But when it comes to rehabbing, I would say, if you're a new investor and you're not very seasoned and you're not very comfortable with taking on, large full gut rehab jobs, right? I think you should certainly look at light cosmetic, jobs. And I've heard folks say, with light cosmetic jobs, you can't add as much value. I actually don't think that's true, right? So we actually are our last deal, we can kind of dive into it later if you want, but
Yeah.
it's a typical BRRRR deal, and it's a very light rehab job, right? So it's just refinishing the floors, just paint and cabinets and things of that nature. But there's one thing that we did to add value that's actually shooting up the rent significantly as well, right? Which is bringing in unit washer and dryer hookups, right? And so we're not getting behind walls and doing electrical work and changing 30 windows and roof and things of that nature, right? But we're forcing appreciation, by creating that value for the tenants, which helps us create an increase in our rents, which also obviously pushes the value in the property as well, right? And so there's certainly a lot of ways that you can add value to a property without having to completely tear it down and put it back together. Right?
Yeah, I mean, and that seems to be a theme. You've mentioned kind of some of these creative approaches a couple of times, whether it was the first duplex you had in Connecticut, but you're always looking to add value where you can. And adding value doesn't mean just thinking about what's good for you, but think about your customer. What's good for your customer? How do you deliver a better product? How do you deliver how do you attract a better tenant? And in turn, that will reward you, right? Whether that's in, fewer vacancies, whether that's in an increased, monthly rent. That's what it sounds like. You're always chasing kind of value add, which is great.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
We're
And so
we're
yeah.
actually going through the same thing. We're on the 6-unit property in Cincinnati I was telling you about. We have, you have kind of this gloomy basement with coin-op laundry, which is great. Coin-op laundry, source of income, but there's no common. They're townhouse style units. There's no common interior access to the basement, and so you have to like walk around the property down this like dungeony basement and do your laundry. And we're looking for somebody who can move into these units, two floor townhouse style units, and call it home, right? It has a homey feel to it. And one of the biggest, after talking to local agents and talking to local folks, one of the biggest things we can do for relatively low cost, since we're doing renovations anyway, is putting in-unit hookups in, which is a huge differentiator in that area. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's thinking about those little things that sometimes aren't ultra obvious. It's not always about the nicest appliances or the nicest countertops. It's about amenities and usability of the space.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we are in a business of providing homes to tenants, right? So the tenants are our clients or customers, and this is a business, and so you need to make sure that you are creating a value for your customers, right? And so for us, going into, I guess this is a good segue for the next step, which is the rent, right? For us, it was very important for us to kind of I would say create like a unique value proposition, and that helped us target that niche market that I was telling you about, right? And so our apartments really are B minus C plus apartments in the Connecticut area, and as far as rents that we charge, right? And so if you look at our finishing, or the types or the quality of renovations that we're doing, right? These are these are apartments or standards that are literally A plus or A minus in my market, right? And so we figure, look, if we can create a value similar to that, right? Without having to overextend ourselves from a cost perspective, which allows us to charge lower market rents than what an A class is charging, right? So we'll create A class value, right? But we're going to execute the plan so well that our costs will be able to justify our rents being at B plus, B minus, C plus, right? And so that creates sort of a whole new segment for us, right? So it's if you're familiar with the blue ocean strategy, it's something like that, right? So rather than try to chase, say, okay, we have an A plus apartment looking, we're gonna chase the extra profits and try to go kind of push and wiggle our way into that market to get a market share of the tenants in there. We were like, look, we can afford to make just as much money by not advertising as an A plus rental, and capture the B minus and get the best of those B plus, B minus tenants, right?
Well, it sounds
so
like you
that's
don't
what we
want to
did.
you don't want to blend in with everybody else, right? It's like if somebody comes and sees your apartment in your tenant class or your neighborhood class, you guys are going to easily stand out. And I imagine you have, depending on the project in the area, you have a line of quality applications coming in, for your buildings, which is what every owner and landlord wants, right? For buy and
Yeah,
hold properties.
yeah,
Good for you.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So we, I think that we attract some of the best tenants. Obviously, our screening processes ensures that as well. And one of the things that we keep in mind that's very important to us too when we are screening for tenants is trying to find a tenant that's not only going to take good care of the property, but a tenant that's going to stay longer than just 1 year or 2 years, right? Obviously, like I said, this is a business, so we have to be aware of what it costs us to get a tenant in there, right? So our customer acquisition costs, right? And then also too, what the retention rate is for the customers, which is how little of a turnover we have, or how many tenants are still re-signing a lease after the year. And so that's very important to us. And so, we do certain things that helps us ensure that in the early on process is to offer 2, 3, 4 year leases, right? And just say, hey, so your current rent is $14.50. But if you sign a lease for 3 years, we will guarantee that the 2.5 rent increase rate that happens normally every year will not happen. One, or if it's $14.50, we can knock down the price down to $1,400 if you lock in to a 3-year lease, right?
Got it.
And obviously, we've vetted the tenants very well, so we feel comfortable knowing that, okay, we don't mind being under a contract with these types of tenants for the next 2 or 3 years, right? And that helps because, fine, we're losing $25 per month, right? But every time a tenant leaves and we got to go in there and touch up paint, cleaning crew, or even some of the more major, maintenance costs, that's certainly costing us a lot more than a $25 a month, over 12 months, right?
Right.
And so, that's what we try to help minimize as well, as far as, our bottom lines. And so when it comes to renting, that's very critical for us. It's very important. And I think, quite honestly, if you take away buying aspect of it, that might be the most important piece that ties it all together, obviously, because our main goal is to, long-term buy and hold, right?
Got it.
So that's very important to us.
That's awesome. That's really good information, man. Maybe we can shift gears a little bit. I'd love to hear a little bit around how coronavirus, which came on the scene, kind of came out of nowhere, has really shaken a lot of people in real estate, in the real estate investing space, from new development, new construction, buy and hold purchasing. A lot of people kind of moved to the sidelines. And when we think about, BRRRR projects specifically, so BRRRR buy and hold projects, I'd love to hear a little bit around how it's impacted you and your company. Are you guys still looking for projects? Do you see actually more opportunity on buying and purchasing? How's it impacting your in-flight projects? And then I think what everybody's wondering is lending, right? So when it comes to the refinances, how are you seeing, bank refis change or appraisals change or underwriting terms or lending terms change on the backside of a BRRRR?
Yeah. So, the coronavirus is, it's really affected us, sort of everywhere, right? Like on all fronts, as far as buying, getting properties renovated, in a timely fashion, getting the units rented out, right? And with refinancing as well. I'm going to take a step back here quickly. When it comes to the buying side, we, this is our first, my partner and I, I'm 26, he's 27. This is really like our first time experiencing a downturn. And so, the best that we can do is to just try to, look at historical data, right? Compare it to where we currently are, where the markets are currently going, and be a little bit more data driven, than we usually are. And also too, we don't really have a crystal ball, right? Like we don't know what's going to happen, 3 months down the road, 10 months down the road. Like we can't say, okay, right now real estate hasn't really been, price wise hasn't really been affected significantly like how the stock markets have been, right? We don't really know if that, that sort of delay effect that real estate normally would suffer is really going to happen, right? Or if, prices are going to sustain. We don't really know what's going on. So what we've tried to do is we've agreed that we're not, actively, trying to just, buy anything that comes our way that we would normally buy. We are actually more picky now, right? So that 60% margin that I told you about, that we have to be 60% all in. We actually scaled that back down to 50% for the deal to pass, for us to start analyzing it. And also too, we've started looking at like other sort of strategic financing approaches, like owner or seller financing, right? So we can kind of rely on the current owner to hold the note until sort of the volatility and the unknowns of this current market, crisis passes, right? And then we can kind of refinance into an actual conventional loan. And then in that process, maybe we can turn a property around and force it the value. And when, hopefully when property values are, sustain or picking back up, we'll be in a good position to kind of get out of the seller financing note. So we're trying to assess different strategies on multiple ends. But for us personally, the coronavirus has affected us, on the buying side, like I said. On the rehab side, how it has really affected us is, so we actually we have some rehabs going on right now. Thankfully, my contractor, he's been very diligent in helping us pull through. But obviously, we also wanted to make sure that the contractors that were on site were safe as well. And so we dramatically limited the amount of folks that were on site, right? So, we didn't, the most amount of contractors that would be on site at any given time is 4 contractors, for example, right? And they will be this is a multifamily property, so they would be sort of split split into different apartments, working and things of that nature. And so that obviously, has an impact on our timeline as well, right? Which, quite honestly, if you look at the bigger picture, it's not really that bad. I know folks that are, they have, if you're in Boston area, construction has been totally ceased, right?
Right.
So that's, you have at least, another month or 2 of holding costs that you're going to incur there. So fortunately for me, I didn't have to go through sort of that extreme scenario. But I know that's, that's one of the ways that has affected rehabs. Another part of sort of our business that this has really affected is the renting aspect of it. So we did a couple of rehabs early on this year, and the units were ready to be leased out last month in March. Yeah. So as soon as the properties hit the market, we actually we generated a lot of leads. We had a lot of applicants, and we took our time going through it, doing our regular screening to make sure we get the right tenants in there. And so one of our apartments, actually, we were able to, rent it out within the first couple of days that we listed it. And then one of the apartments, which was really the last one to go, we were noticing about, anywhere from 8 to 15 showings a day, literally, right? So like it was very busy,
Wow.
a lot of traction. And then, the quarantining orders and advices started coming out, right? And we saw a dramatic turn from 8 to 16 showings per day to 2, right? So like it actually went down to 5, and then it dropped all the way down to like 0, right? So we would go through a whole week with maybe 2 or 3 showings, and so that had a dramatic impact on how quickly we were able to get that unit rented out. And so we actually had to be creative about that unit. So in my market, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments tend to rent out really quickly. A little bit more quicker than a 3-bed or a 4-bed would rent out. And this apartment was a 3-bed. And so, one of the, we had to kind of pivot, right? So we were like, okay, do we drop the prices down to attract more tenants? And what we realized was that the rent price wasn't really the issue, right? The issue was the demographic and the amount of people available in that demographic and willing to come out and take a look at that property. And so what we did was, okay, we can drop down, the rent from $1,600 to $1,550, right? But it's still the same folks, right, that were coming out earlier, but now we're not coming right back out.
Right.
So maybe we need to broaden that demographic. And so what we did was, thankfully, the price between a 2-bed and a 3-bed is only about $25 difference, right? So we dropped the rent by $25, and we changed the listing from a 3-bedroom to a 2-bedroom apartment. And
interesting.
Yeah, and the amount of applicants shot right back up, and within 4 days we got a tenant, right?
Wow.
And so we've been getting affected in areas like that, but we've been kind of strategically pivoting to kind of help see how we can creatively overcome that.
Dude, that's so interesting, because I've heard, I've talked to a lot of people around, and there's two schools of thought here, right? One is like, now is not the time to make concessions. Now is the time to make sure you're sticking to your criteria. You're making sure you're getting those quality tenants in place now. And then there's others that are like, no, drop the price, get folks in, vacancy will kill you, etc. I have not heard anybody say what you just said, which is like to change the profile of your product, right? and actually re-advertise as a different product with a 3-bedroom to a 2-bedroom, therefore hitting an entirely different demographic, right? So folks looking for 3 bedrooms, maybe you have more families, folks that are really looking to move or make change during this time. 2 beds, different demographic. People might be more, or as you've seen, people may be more willing to move around and change places and aren't as kind of shaken and staying put in their current rental. That's
Yeah,
fascinating.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And one of the selling points too was, you advertise it as 2-bed, right? The tenants go in there, they get
They,
surprised.
and
This
they're
is a huge
surprised, right?
space, right? And then guess what? The third bedroom is now an office for them, which
Right,
is, they're telecommuting now because of coronavirus. And
right.
so having a space that they could dedicate to as an office in an apartment that they live
Man,
in,
that's
huge
brilliant.
bonus. So,
That is
that worked.
brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. And,
Good.
$20 less in the rent, right? Over 12 months, right? Compared to letting the apartment sit an extra month
Right.
and losing $1,600 in rent. I'll take the $20.
Yeah, and I guess
Yeah,
that depends on where you are, right? It's market specific. If a 3-bed is going to pull you $500 extra a month, maybe you rethink that concession. But where in your market it was almost the same. That's brilliant, man. Good
yeah,
for you. Good for you. So
yeah,
that's what you're seeing on the
yes,
rentals. That's what you're seeing on the rental side. And I know you touched upon like creative financing, owner financing, and things like that earlier, which has become it's always been popular, but it's making a comeback here
mhm.
with banks tightening. But on the refi side, how are you guys approaching it? Are you actually where you already kind of you've already taken possession of the property, and so it's not like you have an owner to go back and try to owner finance with. So how are you approaching refis? Are you thinking about just waiting that out, or do you have good relationships with good with lenders that can refi you at kind of because of your
Yeah, sure.
conservative
So
lending options? What are you seeing there?
yeah. Actually, before I go into that answer,
Sure.
into that question, I want to mention something really quickly about the owner financing, right? This is a roadblock that folks get into out there. If you reach out to a seller, right, and he says that he can't finance it because he owes money
Because
on
he
the
has a
property,
mortgage.
or he still has a note. Um, that's not the end all be all. You can subject to, and you would be surprised how often that would work out, right? So just tell them, hey, that's fine. You can still assume the note on the property, and I will assume the title on the property, and I will just pay you. I will pay you whatever your note is, right? Your debt service is, and you can pay them. And if the numbers are good and the cash flow is good, you can actually split that with them or give them a cut, and you would be surprised how well that could work. So we're actually trying to use that approach on a deal that we're looking at. It's a bundle deal, so it's 2, 3 families and a single family, and it's a similar situation. So the approach is the strategy is, right now the total rents for that is around 6,000, but we think that with market rents we can push it to 9,000. So we're going to buy those properties with that 6,000 current value, whatever the value of the property is, and then within 2 years we're going to turn a property over. We're going to renovate it and update and increase the prices as the tenants turn over, and then we're going to refinance it and pay the owner in lump sum. So it's going to be a balloon payment with interest only. It's going to be a balloon payment at the end of the term with interest only payment for the first 2 years as we turn over the property. And so, yeah, if you get those roadblocks with seller finance, that's definitely an avenue to explore. Um, Going into the refinancing aspect of things, so we're actually doing a couple of refinances right now. One of them actually is going through, and the other, so we have two right now going on. One is going through. We haven't seen any holdbacks or drawbacks on that. And then the other one, the lender actually put underwriting on hold because of the volatility in the market, which we understand. So we should be hearing back from them on May 4th. So hopefully, that's going to end up working in our favor. The good thing is, going back to buying, right? When we were really picky and we bought with great margins, right now we're stuck with another month, possibly two. Who knows when, the underwriting freeze will be lifted. But we're stuck with a note where we're paying 8% interest because it was a hard money that we used, right? But because, we bought with very large margins, and we kind of, follow through with our numbers and what we really wanted, we have enough, meat on the bone to kind of help offset some of those costs, right? And so not only are we not coming out of pocket, we are actually still cash flowing pretty well, right? And so, which goes back to making sure that you're buying right and you're being very picky and very conservative with the numbers, just to help give you that safety net.
That's
we
awesome.
have, yeah.
And
Yeah,
most
we
of your
have,
stuff, most of your stuff is residential, right? Like you're in like
yes,
multifamily with 2, 3, 4. You're not in the bigger multifamily commercial
no,
stuff,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Got it.
These are all small multifamilies. Yes. Yep.
Got it. That's awesome. You were going to say something?
Yeah. So I was saying, so with the refinances, we have the rehab that I told you was slowing down on. That should be, we should be getting ready to start the refinance process in about 2 weeks. But we are actually not sure. So on Monday, hopefully we'll get back to our lender and talk a little bit more about what the road plan or what the roadmap is for that. But that there's a possibility that, that might delay as well a little bit, right? And so if it does, thankfully that was another deal that, I think, from a numbers perspective was really, really good. So, our cash flow should be able to, we have enough, meat on the bone to kind of help us offset some of those holding costs with the high interest rates. Yeah.
That's awesome. Very cool, man. That is a lot of really good information. I could talk to you for hours on this stuff, but we're gonna start to wrap this up. I'm sure we look forward to having you back on again soon. Maybe when we're through this, coronavirus stuff a little bit more, and we get into the summer market, and we can start actually talking through some specifics on some of your projects.
Absolutely. Well, you want to dive into this deal that I mentioned?
Yeah, we
really
can.
Quickly?
Let's do that, and then we'll wrap it. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
I think that'd be a good note to end on. So
Sure.
we bought this duplex in New Britain, Connecticut, and we bought it for 105, right? So we bought it for 105, and I think each unit was renting for about $900 when we bought it. And we're putting 32 into it, right? So we're going to be all in 137. And the property actually, when we first bought it, which we actually bought it only 2 months ago, the ARV at that time was 230.
Wow.
It's actually 233, but let's say 230. And we'll be all in, 60% of that 233 or 230 is around I believe 138. And so, we'll be all in, under that 138, obviously minus closing costs, and things of that nature. But we'll be all in around 138. And by the time we are refinancing it, we'll be able to do the 60/40 LTV, which helps us with our monthly costs or expenditure, right? Because that dramatically brings that down because the note on it is very low. And so that's going to be a 60/40 possible scenario there. And we're going to be able to pull all of our cash out that we put in initially. And check this out. So one thing, what we just actually recently found out was Section 8 vouchers in that neighborhood, right, in that city, allows the tenants rents to go as high up as $1,500 per unit.
Wow.
for a 3-bedroom, right? So these are 3-bedroom. These are 3-bedroom. I think when we bought it was a 2-bed. So it's a 3-bed each unit now. And the general market rates are $1,300 to $1,400 depending on the finishing for our market class. But with Section 8, we can go as high up as $1,500, right? And that puts like each unit's cash flow to about like $600 possibly.
Wow. So you're pushing rents up. Not only are you buying it all in for your 60% target based on ARV, but you're also pushing rents up more than 30%. That's
right, exactly. Yeah.
And not to go down this rabbit hole, but they're government they're subsidized housing vouchers, which people that have tenants right now on subsidized, borrowing are counting their blessings on the first of each month. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's
Which is
that sounds like an awesome one, man.
Yeah, yeah, which was very great because I think, in light of the current circumstances in the market, we wanted to kind of pivot a little bit with, our tenant profiles. And I think having a mixture of tenant Section 8 tenants is going to be really, really good for us because, we can guarantee rents a little bit more better going
Yeah.
that route. And
Yeah. A little
from my
diversification.
research, yeah, yeah, and from my research, in my market, I think we're going to make a very, very good killing with Section 8 because of like the finishing, right? Like the stainless steel appliances, the white soft close shaker cabinets, the hardwood floors, and the futuristic LED lights, right? The minimalistic, LED lights and things like that. So, yeah, I think we're going to start looking at that. Tighten up our tenant screening on that front.
Yeah.
But we're certainly hopeful that that's going to work out pretty well.
That's awesome. I mean, it's just like we were talking about the, advertising, differentiating a premium product in a B or C class neighborhood. It's no different, right? If, too many folks, I think, that play the Section 8 or housing voucher game, don't treat the tenants well, don't treat the properties well. They do the bare minimum. And if you can differentiate in that space and provide a product that totally differentiates yourself,
Hmm.
you can have a really high quality tenant and somebody who's going to stay for a long time. I'm a big
Absolutely.
believer in that.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
I had a
awesome.
tenant that sent me a text a couple of days ago. One good thing about us too is we own our property management as well, so it's more like a
Okay.
vertical integration on that side, and so we have real insight into tenant feedback and things of that nature. And I actually started managing my units when I first started out, so I still have relationships with some of my early on tenants. And so I got a text from my tenant the other day. His lease is coming up and he was like, I'm going to re-sign my lease, and it's not because of the virus, but I actually don't think that we can find. Not only can we find, we can't find a better tenant or a better apartment out here, and we
Wow.
need to make sure that we're staying here for our kids as well. So that's one of the things that actually helps keep me going as well, right? So like being able to provide homes for folks that have pride in their homes that they're renting as well. So
Yep.
that's really
Yep.
what I do it for,
It's
honestly.
not just
Yeah,
a building, right? It's a home. It's a home for these folks. And,
exactly.
and if you keep that top of mind, I think you can be a step above the rest. So that's awesome, man. Thanks again for taking time out of this nice day. Before we wrap, let's do two things real quick, if you don't mind. So one is, target audience for us is kind of newer investors, folks that are really looking to kind of take that first step or to move from 1 to 2 to 3 properties. With everything that's going on right now, what's one thing that you would recommend that a newer real estate investor focus on right now?
Yeah. So one thing in this right now, like in this current market, right? So if you're watching this, right now in what is it? April, right? The late month of April, early May 2020. I would say, hold on to your money, right? Hold on to your cash, save, stash, but don't just be, dormant, and just, save your money and not do anything, right? I would say really, really learn the game, right? What you want to do. If it's wholesaling you want to go into, if it's buy and hold investment you want to go into, find resources and really, really study the game, and figure out how you can possibly attack, right? So it's kind of like, a lion on a hunt, right? You go in there, you kind of lay the land, you study, and then you kind of get ready for the attack, right? It's the same thing here. And part of that is also networking, right? I know a lot of us, used to come up with the excuses for not going to local meetups. I have work, I got to go to the gym and things of that
Yep.
nature. You don't have an excuse anymore. You can join them virtually now, right? So try to network, get on your local Facebook investors group, network, create a strong network. One thing that's really going to be successful for a long-term buy investor is make sure that you have a rock star team, and you can form a rock star team by finding the next rock star person to start with, right? So if you need to get a realtor to work with, find a great realtor who is a rock star, and she can most likely, it's going to turn into a domino effect, right? She can
Right.
most likely introduce you to other folks that are going to be as good as, you know, the realtor. And then you can start, you know, kind of putting together all of the pieces that's going to help you attack. But I think that's the best thing to do right now. Obviously, if you're already in a game, then there are lots of different ways that you're going to have to pivot and whatnot. But if you're new and you haven't jumped into it yet, that's what I would recommend you do.
That's awesome. Great advice. Awesome. Thank you, Lesley. And then for folks that want to reach out to you, maybe network with you or ask questions or just kind of, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram and Twitter. So Instagram is Big Lesley, so BIGLESLEY. Twitter is BIG_LESLEY. And you can follow my company's Instagram page as well. We actually just set that up. So we'll be posting some educational content on there and some of our deals. But that is Hillstone Holdings. So it's HILLSTONE So Hillstone
Awesome.
Holdings.
And
Yeah.
we'll drop all that in the show notes so people can link directly out too. So
Awesome.
Awesome conversation, man. It felt like it flew by. I literally could talk to you for hours. I mean, I know we've done it before, but I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. And we probably will again. So thanks for coming on, Lesley. It was, you know, I hope that folks find this really informational. I think folks have a lot to learn from you. I have learned a lot from you. So thank you for coming on and taking the time.
Thank you, Todd. I really appreciate this, and thanks for having me on. This is a great honor. I always love, you know, talking to you about these topics. And I know you have tons of great information and knowledge that, you know, a lot of folks can help, can learn from as well. So hopefully soon, the tables can switch, and then, you know, you can give us your game.
Sounds like a plan. All right,
Sounds good.
Lesley, take it easy. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks for watching. Talk to y'all soon. Bye.
Thank you, Todd. Bye.
Bye.